Today I'm giving you a few tips on how to improve your electric guitar sound once you've recorded it. I'm going to talk about equalization, dynamics and compression, and panning in that order. I'm going to assume that you're a complete beginner, not necessarily a complete beginner guitarist, but a complete beginner at recording stuff. My headphones have fallen off and it started to strangle me. I'm assuming you're a complete beginner when it comes to music production, but that you have been able to record guitars. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, by the way, if you're into anything guitar related. I'm covering a lot of different aspects of guitar, so whatever your particular area of interest, I'm sure there will be something on this channel for you, so subscribe. So I don't know what DAW you're using or what software or indeed what hardware. I'm going to talk in relation to Cubase, which is this thing, because that's what I use, that's what I happen to own, is Cubase. Most of everything I talk about today will be true across the board. I don't believe any terms should be different in Ableton or Pro Tools or whatever, although layouts and the appearance of plugins and things will almost certainly be different. I'm not saying you have to use Cubase at all, just that that's what I'm using. So we have our distorted guitar sound already recorded, and it sounds like this. And it's going to just repeat like that indefinitely. It is slightly out of time. I'm not sorry. I needed a take, so whatever. It will do for our purposes. So let's start with EQ, which is short for equalization. Cubase has this plugin, EQ Studio EQ. And I like it because it has this visualization so you can see the sound as it plays. And you can see what effect your alterations are having on the sound. I really like that, that's why I use it. We have these 4 different bands, which is essentially 4 different points of manipulation to change the EQ, to change the sound of our instrument. So if I turn on, for example, band number 1, this little dot number 1 appears, and number 2 gives us number 2. Now I can drag these around. So if I go left and right, that's changing which frequency I'm altering. So left is the kind of bassier frequencies, right is the kind of higher, harsher frequencies. So I'm hoping that the screen capture is detailed enough to capture this kind of crosshair thing where my cursor is. So if I move it left and right and I move it here, I can see that this is going to affect just above the 50 Hertz mark. If I move it over here, it's going to be 5,000 Hertz or 5 kilohertz. Now if I pull this up, I am going to be boosting. In this instance, I'm going to be boosting the 500 frequency. If I bring it down, I'm going to be cutting the 500 frequency out. Yeah? And I can see by how much I'm doing that with this guide here. They also show up here. So if I move this down, you can see that's minus 16.7 decibels we measure that in, or plus 16.4 decibels. It's also up here in this corner as well. They've literally covered all the bases. Word of advice, if you're adding or subtracting more than 10 decibels, you're kind of changing the frequency so much that it's kind of more of an effect than a tweak or an alteration. If you feel like you need to tweak it by that much, then either your ears are wrong or you've screwed up the recording somehow. Sorry if that's mean or generalizing, but that is basically the case. Our ears are quite sensitive to sharp EQ changes, so we've got this Q, it's called a Q, I'm not really sure why. So you can see if I pull it up, it's a really sharp, really thin. So if I put it here, it's going to cut out this 2000 frequency and not much else. But if I pull it back, it's gonna, there we go, get rid of an awful lot of frequencies either side of it. Our ears are really sensitive to really sharp changes, so you're better off having quite a bit of a curve there where possible. So the following are super generalized rules for EQing guitar. They don't work 100% of the time, they're not really supposed to, but they are good guidelines. Do try and use your ears and try to be objective about what sounds good to you. So these are going to be tiny adjustments, maybe to, there we go, like 2 or 3 decibels, so it should look that small. That is an okay amount to change. So removing a couple decibels at 100 hertz, like this, can reduce muddiness. If it sounds kind of crowded and icky in the low end, that's muddiness. Adding between 150 and 250, make it warmer. Which it certainly does. Removing at between 350 and 450, so we'll call that 400, can reduce boxiness, which is where it sounds like it's in a box. Yeah, I quite like that. Adding between 2.5k, that's 2,500, and 4k, so let's call that 3,000. Adding will make it punchier. You can see this little lump here that it's adding to. It's just a little bit of fizz, I quite like that. Excuse me. Adding at the 5,000, we'll add bite. Again, you can already hear that. Anything above 5,000 can sound a bit harsh on some instruments, but can also add brightness. It's also where pick on string noise lives, so if that's something that's in your playing and bothers you, maybe just reduce that a bit. There you go. It's worth mentioning that none of that information lives inside my head. I haven't memorized it at all, so don't feel like you need to memorize it. I know roughly where most of those things are, but I don't keep those adjectives, those specific terms in my brain. Like, I don't think 500 kilohertz will add bite. No. I just know that if I hear something that's kind of a problem, I know roughly where to add or remove. But it's always about trial and error, because every different instrument, every different amp setting, pickup, selection is all going to be different. So don't feel like you have to stick to those rules rigidly. Use your ears and trial and error. Like I say, they are good guidelines, and I got them all from this book. This is a good book. It's a very good book. It's not expensive either. A great tip to get your head around EQing is to create a very tall and very sharp increase or decrease, and just moving it up and down in the frequency range. Next, we're going to look at dynamics, specifically compression. This should be inside of your dynamics folder, compressor. There we are. Dynamics is anything to do with volume. It's basically adjusting the volume in a way that makes the signal smoother, so less dips and peaks. If you're using a cleaner or a jazzy or a funky kind of sound, you can use a compressor to reduce really hard strums and a limiter to increase really soft picking. Because we've got a distorted sound here, the sound is already kind of compressed and leveled, and you can see that in the waveform. The dips don't really go past this point at all, except when they stop playing, and there aren't peaks like, there's a couple above this point, but it's all basically quite contained within this area. Dynamics can be really hard to get your head around, especially if you're using distorted sounds, because it's quite hard to hear the actual difference. So what I'm going to say, and this is probably the only time I'll ever say this, but I can get away with it because you're a beginner, what I'm going to say is to try out the presets in whatever compressors you have. The rule in general with music production is to not ever lean on plugins, but to always, again, use your ear and use your judgment, because different instruments sound different, and different days you might have a different picking style, whatever. You shouldn't lean on plugins, but you may as well to get started, because it's the best way to get your head around what it actually does. Yeah? So let's load up, I've already searched guitar, fantastic. Let's load up picking guitar 1. So this is with, obviously, without. So the only difference you can hear probably is an overall volume change, which is basically what it's doing. If we were to bounce this, you would see a much flatter signal, but not a huge amount of difference because it's distorted. What I would say is just load up a preset and play around with some of the settings. The really basic settings you need to know are that the threshold is at what point, when a specific volume is detected, at what point the compressor kicks in, so where it starts acting. So I, for example, on this might want it quite high up, because I only want it to bring down really high volumes. You see there, like, that's how much work it was doing. If I pull it down here, that's doing a whole load. I only want a super subtle change. Ratio is how much it does when it detects that decibel range. So again, if I want it really subtle, I'll perhaps go there. If I want it really extreme, I'll have it there. Makeup gain, which is set to automatic at the moment, is how much additional gain you put on after you've done your compressing. So if you feel like you've lost a whole lot of volume, you can boost it again there. Leave it with the auto. I'm not going to talk about these because they're a little more complicated. I'll just talk about attack. That's how suddenly it starts acting once it's detected this decibel range. So if you want to sound a little more natural, you might leave that quite high. If you want it to sound kind of more artificial, you might just have it non-existent. Load up a preset and play with the individual parameters and use your ear to try and work out what's going on. Don't worry about technically what's going on, worry about sonically what the difference is. If you think you know what you're doing with compression, you should perhaps try out a multi-brand compressor, which can be really good with distorted guitars. A multi-brand compressor, which you might not all have, so sorry if you don't, but a multi-band compressor will basically compress different amounts depending on the different frequency range. So you could have a super tight low end and a basically unaffected high end. Whereas this kind of compressor is just going to compress the whole signal regardless of the frequency range. Again, load up a preset, play around with the settings until you find something. Again, just load up a preset, listen to the difference. That's all you need to do. Lastly, we're going to look at panning. Panning is to do with the stereo field, so where in the left and right headphone channel your sound lives, basically. So generally in the center you're going to have vocals, bass guitar, snare drum, kick drum, maybe a lead melody instrument, but perhaps not at the same time as a vocal, maybe. And then either side, in the left and the right channels, you can have guitars, or keyboards, or backing vocals, hi-hats, drum cymbals are usually all over the place. Like you might have your crash over here, you might have your ride over here. So simply put, if you have one guitar, you should shove it either entirely left or entirely right, or mostly left or mostly right, yeah? Because if it stays in the center, it's going to be distracting. And that's one of the easiest ways to get a professional sounding mix. So there we go. That is as simple as I can make those subjects. I'm strangling myself again. I never learn. If you want more detail, I'm probably going to do detailed videos on each individual subject at some point down the road for more advanced users. Otherwise, there's loads of videos on YouTube about these individual subjects. Don't be shy, just get searching. You will find something somewhere if I don't have it on my channel yet. Thanks so much for watching. I know that you have a choice in YouTube videos and it's clear that you made the right one. Thanks for liking the video. Thanks for subscribing. If you have any questions or suggestions, that's what the comment section below is for. Thanks again, and toodaloo. Just briefly, I'm going to mention that I have another channel where I talk about music business and band promotion and all that kind of stuff. There is a link on screen right now to Stabbed Panda Music. I really suggest checking out that channel and subscribing over there as well. Thank you and goodbye.